This forecast is brought to you by me. For information on readings I'm offering, check out my website, manic.mercurian.net. You can also get the links in the description. Thanks. Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, April 15th through Sunday, April 21st, 2024. This is one of those weeks where it's hard to know where to even begin. We have been experiencing so much recently, and I'm here to tell you that it's not quite over yet. I know that many of us are tired. We don't like change. We want everything to just stay normal. Unfortunately, I don't think that's why any of us are here in these lifetimes. We're not here for things to be normal. We're not here for things to be average or boring. We live in very exciting times, for better or for worse. So, let's talk about it. One thing we are moving out of is eclipse season. And really quick, let's just actually run through everything that's kind of going on astrologically, or at least, a good chunk of it. So we've got eclipse season this month, as we've talked about in the recent forecasts. There's also Mercury retrograde at the same time. Plus, we are preparing for the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that will actually happen this week. So we're going to talk about that a lot more in this forecast. Remember with that one, though, it's such a long-term aspect. Jupiter and Uranus are both so slow that this conjunction is really spilling out into the surrounding week. So it's not something that just happens in a day. I will talk about the exact day that this will technically happen, but again, this is something that applies over weeks or even months, okay? And then lastly, we've had a lot of conjunctions to Chiron. As you will remember, that new moon solar eclipse that happened recently that was visible over the United States, that was conjunct Chiron. Mercury retrograde is also conjoining Chiron this week as well. So lots of Chiron activity. We'll talk about what that means as well. So first, let's talk about eclipse season. So that is one thing that we are moving out of. And really quick, I wanted to give you a sneak peek at something that technically isn't within the scope of this week's forecast, if that makes sense. This is the next full moon's chart, basically. If you'll see, it's actually technically just before the full moon. So the next full moon will happen with the sun at 3 degrees Taurus and the moon at 3 degrees Scorpio. So you'll notice, the next full moon, the reason why I wanted to show this chart is because this full moon is going to be far enough away from the nodal axis. You can see it's over half a sign away, and it's in a different sign as well. So that tells you we are done with eclipse season. We're not going to have any more eclipses in this eclipse season. I almost said we're not going to have any eclipses this year, although that's not technically true. There will be some in 6 months from now. This does happen every 6 months or so. So there will be some in the fall. But as for like this first half of the year, we're not going to have any more eclipses at all. So you can rest assured, at least in that arena, the chaos may subside a little bit. However, there is one part of the lunar cycle that is still going to be extremely intense as we are in the process of moving out of eclipse season. And that would be the first quarter moon in Cancer. So I'm actually showing the chart for this event right now. It's not exact, but it's close. It's within the day. So you can see sun is at 26 degrees Aries. That makes me remember another thing that I forgot to mention. Something else going on is just this huge cluster here. So I know I'm going on a tangent. I'll come back to the quarter moon in just a moment. But it doesn't take an astrologer to see this chart and go, okay, what's going on in this area, right? There is just such an incredible cluster, mostly in Aries, but you could also include Pisces and Taurus in that as well. So really quick side note, this applies not to any particular day, but really to this entire week as well as this entire month. Where does this general region fall in your chart? Again, definitely Aries, but also Pisces and Taurus to an extent as well. What general part of the chart is this for you personally? Is this at the top of your chart? Then that means there's going to be tons of activity with your career, with your reputation. Is it the bottom of your chart? Then it's going to be your home and family. Is it the right side of your chart? Then it's going to be more about relationships, your partnerships with other people. If it's the left part of your chart, it's going to be more about you personally. And then honestly, if it is clustered around your ascendant, any of you Aries risings out there, you yourself are probably going through a huge transformation right now, and it's probably spilling out into, your entire life. So it's just always interesting to see, how this falls in your particular chart, and you can get a lot more information from these forecasts that way. So anyway, huge cluster going on, tons of transformations involving ourselves, our self-expression, our individuality, Aries, but also Pisces and Taurus. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out before we continue. But okay, why is this quarter moon such a big deal? I feel like people, kind of tune out when they hear quarter moon. But basically, it's not just the full moons and the new moons that are a huge part of the lunar cycle. Quarter moons, I always say, are, in my mind, they rival the full moon in terms of intensity, change, volatility, etc. And particularly this quarter moon, this is one of the days of each year that I always look out for. There's always a particularly volatile first quarter moon, or quarter moon in general, around this time of year in spring. And the reason why is because for this particular quarter moon that's happening on Monday, April 15th, with the sun in Aries and the moon in Cancer, this is extremely volatile for multiple reasons. The first reason is we have just left eclipse season, so like we're still in the process of leaving that. So remember what I always say, that supercharges not just the new moon, making it a new moon solar eclipse, as well as making the full moon a full moon lunar eclipse. But also the entire lunar cycle is supercharged. So even this quarter moon is going to be more intense just because of that recent eclipse we just had. Okay. Another reason why this is particularly intense, first quarter moons, I would say maybe the most intense part of the lunar cycle, maybe even more so than full moons. Because first quarter moons represent when the moon makes that first square to the sun. It happens about a week after a new moon. So it's basically at the time when the moon has enough light that it's half full, basically, which I know is confusing because it's called a quarter moon. It's because it's a quarter of the way through the lunar cycle. But if you look at it, it looks half full, if that makes sense. So it basically represents a tipping point where we are far enough into this lunation, this lunar cycle, that something is changing. There's a need for change. This is the most physically active part of the lunar cycle, I believe. So it's a time of change. It's dynamic. It's intense. But why this quarter moon? Why did I say I look out for this particular one that happens every spring? The reason why is because look at the signs where the luminaries are. So sun in Aries, moon in Cancer. These are both very strong placements. Okay, sun is exalted in Aries and moon is in domicile in Cancer. Okay, so it's almost like the sun and the moon are making this connection. They're making this aspect to one another. But it's a what's the word, like there's tension, it's a 90-degree square, so that's a tense aspect. But not only that, it's almost like the sun and the moon are fighting, but both of them are very powerful, both of them are very strong. They're both in their kind of like home signs. They're both comfortable, they're both strong, so basically around this time we have an overdose of masculine energy, not just with sun and Aries, but also with the other Aries placements in general. But there's also a huge amount of feminine energy. So the yin and the yang, there are plenty of both, and both are in conflict, let's just say. Okay, so I'm not saying this to scare you necessarily. This is an excellent time for starting something new. And I know that's a little bit contradictory because Mercury is still retrograde. It's kind of a mixed bag right now. On the one hand, we are going back to our roots, making connections with people from our past. Themes from the past are being brought up, as they always are, as this always happens with Mercury retrograde. But at the same time, this week, because of the mini Aries placements, as well as, this quarter moon aspect with the moon in Cancer, all of this is simultaneously showing that we are moving kind of backward, but at the same time, we're moving forward. It's very chaotic. Very chaotic. I could see a lot of stress and anxiety for many of us, but this doesn't have to be stressful. This is always my point with any quarter moon, but especially this week. This is a great time for moving forward, make that change. This is especially excellent if you've been kind of in a rut or if you've been stagnant. if this doesn't wake you up, I don't know what will. Okay, so really exciting time. Like I said, I always look out for this because this is an especially active and volatile time of the year. I would say if there was one transit or aspect that happened every year that I would look for in terms of like, a time that's going to be very volatile or active, the first thing that would come to my mind is the first quarter Cancer moon that happens every spring. That's what this is. Okay. So that's happening on Monday. Also happening on Monday, Mercury is passing over Chiron. So you can see here in this chart as well, Mercury and Chiron are conjunct at 19 degrees Aries. This conjunction will happen relatively fast because Chiron is moving forward, albeit very slowly, and Mercury is traveling backward, at least from our perception, as you know, with Mercury retrograde. So this will be kind of like a flyby. They're kind of passing each other relatively quickly. And really, I think, considering that we just had a new moon solar eclipse conjunct Chiron, and then now, a few days later, Mercury is passing over Chiron. My interpretation of this is that, something that happened last week that, something may have kind of blown up or began or reached a tipping point last week. Now, that same thing, whatever it is for you, I think it could be many things that are going on, many changes that are happening right now. Whatever kind of reached a tipping point or changed last week, there's more to the story. There's more change yet to come. And this conjunction between Mercury and Chiron is one of these things that's going to set off further aftershocks, I guess you could say, which that is something we need to talk about. I'm very aware of all these earthquakes that have been happening recently. That is something associated with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. There's so much going on right now. It's going to be difficult for me to stay on track. But anyway, Mercury conjunct Chiron. So yeah, let's just talk about these Chiron aspects in general. Not only last week, but also now more so this week, as you can see. What is Chiron and Aries all about? Basically we're going back and we're healing old wounds, misunderstandings, things from our past, areas where we've been misunderstood or overlooked or, not fully represented ourselves. This is an excellent time for healing those wounds, correcting those misunderstandings, speaking up for ourselves, asserting ourselves and our individuality. It's not a time for compromising. If we know something to be true, if we have a feeling or an instinct, it's time to honor that. And I'm aware of, this isn't all sunshine and rainbows. It's not all kumbaya, let's gather around the campfire and be one great, loving, happy family. It's not about that at all. There is a struggle. And just because there's conflict doesn't mean that this isn't a divine process, okay? This is something we're meant to go through. We are fractured, right? Although we all are part of the same consciousness, we don't fully realize that in these lifetimes. I don't think we're fully meant to, honestly. We are fractured. We are in different groups and we're different individuals. So it's a time for bringing this truth and understanding to light, basically, so that we can understand ourselves, so that we can understand each other. So I know that's really heavy. With Chiron aspects, things tend to get weird in general. I think things have been very weird lately. I think we can all agree on that. But that's my take on this Chiron stuff. And again, consider Chiron plus Mercury retrograde. Do the math, Chiron and Aries is everything I kind of just said. At least that's my take on it, the best I can understand it. Add in Mercury retrograde, going back, rethinking things, opening up your intuition. Those of us, I know it's a minority, but those that are born with Mercury retrograde in their natal charts are feeling probably very empowered right now. They're probably very active. And for the rest of us, this may be uncomfortable, but it's a very essential time for going backward, going within, going to our past, and healing those things from our past. Okay, let's move on, though, because I don't want this forecast to go on forever. But for Friday, April 19th, two major things happening. The first of all, Sun entering Taurus. I think this is exciting. I mean, I'm kind of biased, though. I think it's exciting whenever the sun enters pretty much any sign. But, sun was exalted in Aries, so we were in that first trimester of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. I do cater to the Northern Hemisphere. Most people live in the Northern Hemisphere, so for you Southern Hemisphere people, I'm definitely aware that, you are experiencing the opposite. You are going into the second trimester of fall, you could put it. That is Taurus for you. For most of us up north, though, we're moving into also Taurus, which for us, though, it is the middle trimester of spring. So on the most basic level, Aries is the initiation. It's the wake up, from winter. It's the full initiation of spring. Taurus is where, what began over this last month or so is kind of taking root. It's stabilizing itself. It's fleshing out a full existence, you could say. Okay, so all of us in different ways are experiencing what I just said. It can look very different depending on what your chart is all about. For you, Taurus might be a very dark time. For others, this might be a very easy time. It's completely different. But for us in general, Taurus is ruled by Venus. This is, in many parts of the world, this is a very beautiful time of year. Okay. All right. So Sun moving into Taurus, huge changes. Again, look to where Taurus falls in your chart. This shows we are moving away gradually from this focus on Aries. We still have Venus, Mercury, and North Node all pretty much conjunct, if I might add, in Aries. So still that huge focus on turning points with our individuality. All of them are also kind of loosely conjunct the North Node as well. So it's almost like many of the themes that went on last week with that new moon solar eclipse are still playing out and reverberating. We're still having these earthquakes and aftershocks, so to speak. And I mean that literally and figuratively. So still a lot of activity in Aries, but again, Sun is moving into Taurus, saying, at least as far as the Sun is concerned, he or it is saying, let's move on, let's go, let's stabilize. I do like this because it brings a little bit of peace and stability, maybe, to the picture. But I would say there's still a lot of volatility elsewhere in the chart. The only other thing I wanted to mention for Friday is, again, technically there is an exact conjunction. So Mercury retrograde is passing Venus. They're kind of passing each other because, again, remember, Venus is direct, Mercury is retrograde. So they are flying by each other. But this is beautiful because although Venus is in detriment and Mercury is retrograde, so they are both a little bit weird right now. They're a little bit out of place. They are pushing us to more obscure avenues, you could say, more individuality for sure, different ways of thinking, etc. Although that can be a little bit weird, a little bit out there, for better or for worse, there is this really sweet aspect, I guess, with anything involving Venus, but specifically with Venus and Mercury. This is excellent conversational energy. Let's share information and do so in a really pleasant, kind of comfortable way. Venus and Mercury, I think these two energies are essential for like any good party, for example. Having good conversation that's like light and fun, but also interesting. That's Mercury and Venus together. But again, remember, Venus in detriment, Mercury retrograde. This is showing that although this can be a really sweet energy for conversations and learning and things of that nature, again, it is focused on the obscure. It's focused on individuality and kind of far out ideas, left field ideas, you could say, things of that nature. Okay, for Saturday, April 20th, this is a major day astrologically. I don't think there's any astrologer that this event is not on their radar, if that makes sense. So for April 20th, Jupiter conjoins Uranus at 21 degrees Taurus. Major deal. And remember what I said in the intro, this isn't something we haven't been feeling already. This is a slow conjunction. It's a very slow pass by. Jupiter is traveling relatively quickly, but that's in terms of like Jupiter's speed. Jupiter's still traveling way slower than any of the inner planets or the moon, for that example, for sure. However, Jupiter is passing over Uranus. So why is this a big deal? It's because they're both relatively outer planets. They travel slow enough that this particular conjunction only happens every 13, 14 years or so. Okay, so relatively rare. And as you may know, Uranus is the energy of earthquakes. It's the energy of sudden shifts, shifts in consciousness, shifts in awareness. It's a very unpredictable energy, Uranus is. So when you add in Jupiter, Jupiter expands whatever it touches. It kind of blows up whatever it touches, okay? So if you take the energy of earthquakes and then add kind of dynamite, basically, and an expansion of Jupiter, we can interpret this in multiple ways. I could see this literally being earthquakes. You have to also take into account this is happening in Taurus, which is an earth sign. So huge shifts, literally, I'm going to keep coming back to earthquakes because earthquakes are a great representation, both literally, like literal earthquakes, as well as figuratively. Okay. Something that may have been stable for a long time may suddenly change in a dramatic and unpredictable way. A different way of looking at this would be to say that it is very intellectual in nature as well. So very physical, but also potentially very intellectual. Again, Uranus can be, the awakener, it can trigger epiphanies, shifts in perception. And Jupiter has to do with the expansion of the consciousness, expansion of the mind as well. So again, where does Taurus fall in your chart? Specifically 21 degrees Taurus. That's the area where there's going to be some major volatility. There already has been some major volatility in that area for you. But this is going to reach its peak on Saturday, April 20th. Last but not least, the last day that I'm going to cover for this forecast is Sunday, April 21st. And this isn't it is a big deal, but we have to speak in relative terms. There's so much happening right now. But I did want to mention Venus does cross over Chiron right now. And I think this is really beautiful. Again, Chiron in Aries has us being so sensitive. We're working through so much. We're all like either screaming babies or maybe teenagers or something. We're working out our consciousness. And Venus is bringing like a sweet energy. It's kind of balancing things out, kind of mulling things over, if that makes sense. So I do think this can be really excellent for healing these like deep psychological issues that we are working through right now, all of us in our own way. So that's what I have for you this week. Again, there's just so much. I rattled off so much information in the last 20 minutes or so. So I hope this is helpful. I hope this helps to make sense of things. Definitely tune in next week. Things will gradually start to get a little bit less chaotic, but there's definitely no shortage of things we have to talk about. That there's definitely a lot going on next week as well. So thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Have a great week.